Welcome to HDTV. You're now rocking with your boy. Fair use, Zach. Fair use, Zach.
Into the conversation because he was also watching Last Dance, and he had this to say on trying to compare eras. All right, this is what he tweeted yesterday, and he tweeted it along with this image. MJ is the best ever. That's an enormous compliment given the greatness of others. Yet some say today's players wouldn't be dominant in the 80s or 90s. Not true. Or do we similarly believe the 80s and 90s players wouldn't be dominant in the 60s? Today's player is better than ever. Now just look at those numbers on your screen. Bill Russell won MVP in 1962 despite the fact that Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds. Look at Oscar Robertson's numbers. Look at Elgin Baylor's numbers, 38 points and 18 rebounds coming off the bench that year. So, Jay, this all started with a text you sent me right after the show, which you made it pretty clear you were not happy with some of the things you heard said here on Get Up yesterday, which I'm totally good with. I want to give you the floor. What is it about the generation of players today that you think people are missing?
Well, I think it's this romanticism of yesteryear in light of The Last Dance. Look, I loved every minute of The Last Dance, and I've loved every minute of the Michael Jordan retrospective. You know, I played against Jordan in college and thought he was amazing then and now. I think he's the greatest ever. But that's a profound compliment to say that you think someone's the best ever. It doesn't diminish who's second or third. Like, I'm saying Michael Jordan is better than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's profound given the greatness of Kareem. But this idea that somehow today's player would not be dominant back in the 80s or 90s because they could hand check back then or the game was different, I find that ludicrous. The idea that LeBron, Durant, Kawhi, Giannis, Doncic, Harden, Westbrook, Curry, you name it, Klay Thompson, they wouldn't be dominant back then. They might not have beaten Jordan's Bulls, but the players of the 80s took them to 7 games. And, Jordan and Pippen, those guys, they beat, I think it was 7 teams. They eliminated 7 teams that had won 60 or more games. They were great. But I don't ever hear any of these, similarly old men like me saying that, wait a minute now, the players of the 80s or 90s, they would have really struggled against the players of the 60s. And I kind of wonder, like, I'm a reverse get off my lawn guy here. I kind of wonder when this precipitous decline of skill and toughness started. Did it start in 99? Because I don't buy this. I think the players today are better than ever. And we do this only in basketball. I've never heard anybody say, you think Patrick Mahomes could have got a pass past Ray Nitschke? Or Mike Trout, you think he could have hit that crazy sidewinder stuff of Kent Tekulve? Forget it. Simone Biles, you think she could have beaten Olga Korbut in her prime? We never say that nonsense. But we say it in basketball, and somehow we believe it because they could hand check back then. Now, that doesn't make any sense.
Let me throw a thought at you here. I do not think anyone, I for the most part, agree with the fact that we only tend to do this in basketball. I completely agree with you. The players of today are more skilled than ever before, and they avail themselves of things that are available to them today in the areas of technology and medicine and things like that, and that would make them greater athletes. But when Mark Jackson said they're cut from a different cloth, do you see that? Because you're around young people now. You're around college-level athletes and all that all the time. Do you think the mentality of the young people coming up in the sport today is similar to the mentality of young people coming up in the sport when you were one of them?
Yes, absolutely. I don't buy for 1 second that because Tom Brady was born in the 70s and that these current players in the NBA were born in the 70s or 80s, that somehow they don't know what competition is, and that all died out with players that were born in the 60s. That's nonsense. And it's similarly nonsense that somehow the players in the 80s or 90s weren't as tough-minded as the players who played in the 60s. Look, like the greatest generation ran up Omaha Beach. I have tremendous respect for that. But courage and greatness didn't die out when later generations came along. That just doesn't make any sense to me. The players today are competitive, and this is all in light of Michael Jordan being the greatest and watching that. Jordan's attitude and his drive, I think, are unmatched. But it doesn't mean those that were with him didn't have similar drive. It might not have been as good, or that his leader, like you win and everything's justified. His leadership style may be questioned by some. I don't have any problem with it. And the fact is, he won with it. But that doesn't mean that other leadership styles don't work as well and would not win. There have been a lot of championships won since then. Jordan's just the greatest, and that's a profound compliment. But the idea that today's player wouldn't be dominant back then is to me ludicrous.
I don't disagree with that. Guys, I'm going to keep it here because I want to stay on this conversation. Here's the difference, Jay, or a difference that I see. If you look back at the early part of Michael Jordan's career, when he was coming back from a bad injury and the team was begging him not to go out there and play, he was insisting on going out and playing. He played 82 games a year, each of the 3 seasons of their second three-peat. The notion that players today preserve themselves in the way that they do, the idea of rest and all that kind of stuff that we see in the sport today. That, I think, is one of the reasons people point to. If you told Michael Jordan that we're going to sit you out of this game because we're playing 3 games in 4 nights, which they don't even do anymore, by the way, I think that's where you might see some of the difference in mentality.
Well, I mean, some of the different, I don't think the mentality is any different. I honestly don't. I think these players play incredibly, but they're looking at a different landscape now. I mean, that's like saying back in the day, pitchers, like Tom Seaver never came out of a game for a reliever. He pitched complete games. And now Clayton Kershaw comes out after the 6th inning or the 7th inning. The game has changed, and the landscape has changed. You know, even back when MJ was injured, Jerry Reinsdorf and his team were looking out for their investment. And the investment back then was not as profound in a player as it is now. They put a 7-minute restriction on him. He fought against it and ultimately was allowed to play more. But you know, the idea that players aren't playing hurt now or they don't want to do it, I just don't buy that. I think they compete just as hard. I don't buy that somehow, you know, Tom Brady, because, you know, isn't as tough as Joe Montana because the rules are different and you can't hit him like you used to. I just don't buy that.
So, sorry you heard that BS. Today's players are not as good as players from yesteryears. There's only a few, maybe, but as an overall, no. Talent-wise, like athleticism and things, I don't know if they could mess with the players from the 60s, 70s, or the 80s. Like, I believe if Bill Russell played and Bill Russell could translate his game to any era. Wilt Chamberlain, they had to change the rules because Wilt Chamberlain was dominating. Now, if Wilt Chamberlain played in the 90s, he would have dominated easy because it was mainly man. You couldn't zone, like you did, I think, back in the 60s, I believe you could zone. I don't believe you could zone. Yeah, I think you could zone back in the 60s and early 70s. Hold on. Let me see. I got to look this up. That's interesting what I just said. Okay. Yeah. So they didn't play really zone like that. Yeah. Okay. My apologies. They banned it in January 1947. Okay. All right. So basically, let me rephrase my statement. The team was allowed to collapse a lot on Wilt Chamberlain. They were allowed to double team, do different things to get him off of his marks. But if Wilt was able to play in the 90s with the floor how it was, because they opened the game up for Michael Jordan to do what he does and elevate his game. Wilt would have been able to do even more. Wilt was averaging like 50 or 60 some points, like in the 60s, and I believe and then like in the early 70s, he just stopped scoring. He just started passing and do other things. because the writers and people were criticizing him, saying that he was a ball hog. But let's stay in perspective. The players from back in the day are more skilled than today. And what people don't understand what skill is. Skill in basketball is the ability to use both hands. You could go left, you could go right, you could finish with your left, you could finish at your right. You know, the perfect angles, the fundamentals like where to be on the floor, off the ball or on the ball. It's a lot of things that skill points to, you know. So, like here, what is skill in NBA basketball? And skill encompasses most of everything a basketball player does on the court. This includes what they do to put the ball in the hoop, but also how they help others do the same. The ability to read defensive coverages and make passes to beat that coverage is a skill. Skill is how you finish or how you defend. It's different type of fundamentals. Your footwork, your footwork is also what makes it skilled. Players today footwork is very poorish to me. Very poorish to me. Don't like how it is. Don't like how certain players finish at the hoop. Some players finish at the hoop when they're supposed to finish with their left. They're finishing with their right. Now, people are saying, well, they're saying today's players couldn't play back in the day. They could have. The game was too physical. And this guy here is trying to get all in his feelings. Oh, man, like, I just don't believe, like, if Tom Brady, they said Tom Brady, like, he wasn't as tough as Joe Montana. I don't think everybody's saying that. It's as a complete era, if I was to put these guys in the 80s, there's only maybe a few that can make it. Now, Giannis now could play back in the day because he's gotten his skill level better. He's able to shoot the fadeaway better. He's able to pull up. His mid-range has become deadly. He's able to attack from the left or the right side of the court, which is something that a lot of players don't do. Some players can only attack from one side. LeBron James can only go left. He cannot go right well. Michael wasn't real strong going to his left. He wasn't a strong guy going to his left. And plus, he had certain spots that he picked to shoot. But what he did continuously, I would take over a lot of these guys. The players of today to me are more fragile. They're more mentally weaker. To me, they can't handle physicality. It's only a few. Kevin Durant could play in any era. I mean, he could play in any era. Him and Giannis, Kawhi, when Kawhi's healthy. Only thing I worry about with Kawhi is the physicality, and his body is very brittle. Him and Kyrie, they could play, Steph, all of these guys, but the physicality was different. James Harden could not play back in the day. Him and LeBron James could not play back in the day because these guys can't play without the ball in their hands. The guys I mentioned, Giannis, KD, Kawhi, Steph, Kyrie, Klay, those guys could play back in the day because they can move without the ball. They don't need the ball in their hands 90% of the time. LeBron can only do that. And plus LeBron turns the ball over way too much. If a team saw LeBron James or James Harden with the ball, they get in it, they're pressing them 94 feet. You see, the difference is of today, the defenses have gotten weaker and they've limited what you can do on defense. Now the guy said, oh, you can hand check and everything. How would they know how to hand check, man? If I was to take them out and put them in the game back in the 90s, how would they know how to hand check? Because they haven't been doing it. Now, some defenders get away with hand checking. I forgot who did a video. They said hand checking still does exist. And it does. It's just some players can do it. Like if you're a great defender or you're tagged as a great defender like a Beverly or a Kawhi Leonard, you're allowed to put a hand on somebody back and position them to go certain places. They'll be allowed to do that. But a lot of other players, they're not privy to that. They're not privy to that at all. Today's players mentally couldn't handle that physicality every day for an 82-game season. Do you know how physical? It was physical from game 1 to game 82, or I think they played lesser games. I think they played lesser games back in the day, and then they started adding games and everything. But the 82-game series, everybody talk about the 90s. The 90s, in my opinion, I think the 2000s were better than the 90s. Personally, I think the 80s were better than both of them. I think the 80s were better than the 90s and the 2000s. But I would always put the 2000s over the 90s. I just think the 90s was a little more physical. They played a better defense, I believe. But in the 2000s, man, you had competition everywhere. In the 90s, it was just Jordan versus Suns. Jordan had the better teams. But I've always thought the 2000s were better than the 90s. Now, the 80s, I would say the 80s. I would say the 80s, and then I would say the 70s. I would go 80s, 70s, 2000s, 90s, the 60s, and then I would go, I think they played in the 50s as well. The 50s, they were straight, but it wasn't that many of us in the game. The 50s were mainly white players. So I don't really count the 50s because it wasn't really no integration of black and white. But my point is this. Skill-wise, these players today are very terrible at skill. Their IQ is very low. They're settling for bad shots, bad threes because they see Steph Curry doing it. So they want to do it. And that's not helping the game. It's hurting the game. Not blaming it all on Steph. I'm blaming it really on the NBA because they've pushed to shoot threes more because Steph's been doing it. Also, the thing I also hate is the LeBron thing. When you're right at the rim, you can score and then you just pass it out for a three, or that's the dumbest shit I've ever seen. So that's why I say that today's basketball, the fundamentals are terrible. The IQ is terrible. The coaching is terrible. And the defense is terrible. So stop with this cockamamie bull crap about, well, today's players, look at the stats they're putting up. Of course they can put up stats. There's no defense. It's only maybe a few guys who play defense. But this notion to say today's players, listen, today's players couldn't play in the 2000s. Seriously. They couldn't play in the 90s. They couldn't play in the 80s. They couldn't play in the 70s. It's only a few. When people are saying today's players, they're not saying the obvious like Kevin Durant, Giannis, Steph, Klay, Kyrie. Those guys could play back in the day because they could play without the ball in their hand. You understand? All Steph would just be like his dad, Dale Curry. He would be, except in my opinion, I think he has a better dribble than Dale had, but he's just like Dale. He's just like Dale. He's just in a new age where you can't really defend him. Like if Curry played back in the day, Curry would be a bench guy. Kyrie could play back in the day, but because of his skill level. But his problem would be his body. Kyrie would be hurt like after every game because it's physical. He would have to he would have to take a regimen to build his muscles stronger and his bones stronger in order to be able to play in those games. Klay Thompson could play back in the day. I think he would start at the 2 guard, and I believe he would be able to play. Giannis now from the past this year, including last year and the year before last, I know I say last year and this year's Giannis could play back in the day because he posts up, he could shoot, he could finish with his left, he could go left, he could go right. Giannis could play back in the day, and I would put that Giannis at the I would put him at the 4. I would put him at the 3 or the 4. I would put him at the 4. Giannis would be a 4 back in the day. Wouldn't be a 5. The 5s back then were a lot more brolic, a lot natural strength, like that old man strength where your daddy grab your shoulder, come here, boy, and you like, oh, your soul leave your body. Your soul leave your body. So he would be a 4. Kevin Durant would be a 2 guard. He would be a 2 or a 3. I would not have KD playing the 4 or the 5. He's too small. But Kevin Durant could play the 2. He could play the 1. KD could play the 1, 2, or the 3. I would put him at the 1. He could be a Magic Johnson with a shot. Seriously, I would have put KD at the 1, 2, or the 3. And he would dominate. Point blank period. He would dominate. Who else? Kawhi's only thing I worry about is his durability. Like Kyrie, both of them could play back then. I would put him at the 3. He would be a solid small forward, and he would dominate. His only thing is his body. Would his body work or would it fail? Like, that's the only thing. Now, trying to think who else. Devin Booker offensively could play back in the day, but defensively he would have to work on his defense. But Devin Booker could play back in the day, and he also would have to stop all that whining. I mean, he stopped the whining. He's been getting better, but that's the only thing that would hold him back is his whining and lack of defense. You know, he could play defense now, but his lack of defense. Deandre Ayden, he could play, but he would have to work on his footwork and his post game. He would have to build his leg muscles up better. His leg muscles have to be stronger because that's the only way he could play. You know, he got the height, but the leg muscles and things, like, it's easy to push him off of his spots. The same with Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert would get plummeted. He would get posterized left and right. He would get destroyed. You know, when he went against Ewing or Hakeem Olajuwon or David Robinson, even Shaq. Shaq would kill Rudy Gobert. You know, so Joel Embiid could play back in the day, but he would be more in the post. I would not have him shooting, and then he could drift out and shoot a 3 once in a while, but Joel could play back in the day. Joker could play back in the day. We would just be in awe because we would have never seen a big man his size playing like a guard. Like, we've seen that with Hakeem Olajuwon. But Joker could play back in the day. That's no lie. Joker could play back in the day. Who else? Jimmy could play back in the day. Jimmy's problem is his health. His durability is his only problem. Him, Kyrie, and Kawhi. Those 3, that's their only problem. And Joel Embiid, all 4 of them. That's their problem. They could get hurt easily. But Joker could play back in the day. Could Trae Young play back in the day? Absolutely he can. Trae Young could play back in the day. Trae Young is amazing. And I told people he was going to be a problem when he got to the league. Now, I've just named a few players. Luka could play back in the day, but Luka would be much more meaner back in the day because he'll be allowed to get away with cursing guys out and all of that. But Luka could play. Because Luka, what I've loved that he could do is he could play off the ball now. Trae Young could play off the ball. Trae doesn't need the ball in his hands to play. His only problem, I believe, would be defense. That's it. But Trae could play, Luka as well, his defense, but they could play back in the day. But that's only a handful of players. So this is what we're saying. A lot of these guys couldn't play back in the day. Like Art Monk, I'm like, not Art Monk. I'm talking about football. But Malik Monk wouldn't make it back in the day. LeBron wouldn't make it back in the day. Harden wouldn't make it back in the day. Who else? LaMelo wouldn't make it back in the day. They would shut all that tough bravado up quick. Donovan Mitchell, he would have to learn how to play the point a little more because he's more two guard than point, but he would have to learn. I think he could start, but he would have to learn how to play the point and move the ball more, you know. That's a handful of guys. Not everybody could play back in the day. A lot of guys from back in the day I could bring in this era, and they would dominate because they would go inside and out. The game was always made to play inside to out. But the rule changes and everything now to cater to offense. I mean, it depends on the different rules. But today's players, they may be, I don't think they're more athletic than the players from back then. I know I said that they're probably more talented as far as if they get on the court, like they could score, they could just do anything, like run the floor, jump high. They're probably talented, but as far as fundamentals and skills and basketball IQ, they are terrible today. They are not messing with the old school. They're not messing with back in the day players. Back in the day players, it's like in boxing. Back in the day, they fought damn near bare knuckles with gloves. Now they got all this padding and cushioning gloves. Ain't nobody from the day gonna test a Ray Robinson. Ray Robinson would have knocked half of most of these dudes out today. You know what I'm saying? It's like it would have been easy. It would have been easy for Ray. It would have. That's why I don't like really comparing players from today to back in the day. I just don't love to do it because to me, it's very hard. Now, Jason Tatum could play back in the day, but he would have to limit his three-point shooting. He would have to play more inside and hit mid-range. Like, he would be a killer from the mid-range because he has the length, the size, and he could get to his spots. But, yeah, let me know what you guys think, man, in the comment section. Like, do you think today's players are better than players from back in the day? I would say not. I say they're probably more talented, but I don't even know if they're more talented because Wilt Chamberlain had a 48, 50-inch vert. And he could run the floor like a guard. Like, seriously, he could run the floor like a guard, dog. Do you understand what problems that will pose? That's what I'm saying. Like these ESPN guys, they're trying so hard to make back in the day like seem like nothing. And it's like, look, man, if Michael Jordan was in this era, Michael would be dropping 50. If Kobe was in this era, he would be dropping 60. Wilt Chamberlain would just get 100. Like, it didn't matter what era it was. Wilt was going to get damn near 100 points a game. Like, hands down. You weren't stopping the Big Dipper at all. The stilt. You weren't going to stop the stilt, man. You weren't going to stop them. But today's players, no, I don't think as today's player, I only believe 5% or less than that could play back in the day. I'll probably say 2 or 3%, maybe. Maybe. 5. I say about 5, almost 10. I say about 10% maybe could play. I might be wrong. Let me know in the comment section what you think about it. Do you think today's players are better than yesteryear's players? I don't. I believe the yesteryear players are more fundamentally sound, had a higher IQ, and was mentally tougher. Today's players to me are, they don't. Oh yeah, they have IQ. Like the IQ, I don't believe today's players have that. I think they could be more talented, but I don't think they were better ball players. So thank you for listening. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share this. Hit the notification bell to select all to receive upcoming notifications. And if you guys love what you hear, you guys can donate to the page by going to my description box, hitting that Cash App link. That will, of course, take you to my Cash App. You could donate whatever your heart's desire. Also, if we have a live video or a premiere video, you guys can super chat now. Shout out to Soavi Love. Thank you, Shawty, for the donation. I really appreciate that. And like I said, guys, thank y'all for listening. We out. Deezy.